Yeah, despite
Wow.
being a POW for over a year, Arthur and the men under his command are still finding a way to slow down the Japanese military. Because of this, Arthur and the men under his command are sent to live on a hell ship known as the Oryoku Maru.
Okay, now, I understood the Jake McNasty, right? Because of his nastiness, despite the many things that he went through. Experienced some stuff, but like, mostly had a swell time. This man here had zero breaks. How's it going, folks? Jack here with another reaction, and here's the thing. After watching Jake McNeese, and also Dan Daly, who apparently had the copyright of the quote, "You wanna live forever?" I don't know if many of the World War II veterans who managed to get most of the story across wanted to exactly live forever, but they definitely got cemented in history as absolute heroes. Now, I do not know anything about Arthur Wermuth, nor his, I guess, synonym here as the Ghost of Bataan, but I do know of the region of Bataan though, because when you learn about World War II or most of those things, point of reference sometimes tends to be the bad things, like the Bataan Death March. One of the worst acts of cruelty that Japan ever inflicted in the region of the Philippines. But this man here has a confirmed 116 kills, and well, seems to be on that John Rambo energy, so let's watch.
If you were to ask me to name one person off the top of my head that should have been awarded the Medal of Honor but wasn't, it would be a toss-up between Jake McNeese and this guy.
Oh, okay.
Today we're
He's
talking
on that
about the
energy.
one-man army, Arthur Wermuth, or as the Imperial Japanese Army referred to him, the Ghost of Bataan. This video is brought to you by Operation Good Boy. It's an online subscription service that every month will send you and your dog a care package. This month, me and Mushu got a first aid kit for when we go on walks, a water bottle.
He called his dog Mushu. Okay, that's really funny.
For when we go on walks, some dog poop picker-upper bags, some daily supplements for him, and a couple bags of his favorite treats, TREs, treats ready to eat. Right, Mushu?
Oh,
Good job.
the goodest boy.
See, Mushu approves. If you're not really into online subscription boxes, you can also buy the treats, the supplements, or the gear individually over at OperationGoodBoy.com. And regardless of what you get, you're going to get 15% off when you use the discount code QUACK15. So go check them out. Thanks. Let's get back to the video.
Yeah, I have a cat, so.
Background info, December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks America at Pearl Harbor. Okay, everybody knows what Pearl Harbor is, but what most people don't realize is that while Japan was attacking America, they were also simultaneously launching attacks on
everybody else.
every other nation and island in the Pacific. Hong Kong, Wake Island, Guam, Malaya, Singapore, Thailand, all of these nations and islands would fall to the Japanese within 3 months.
Except the Philippines.
The Philippines. If you don't know, at this point in time, the Philippines is actually a territory under the United States of America, who had assumed control of the Philippines from Spain after the Spanish-American War in 1898. Because
yeah, the whole deal with the conquistador. Yeah, America has had quite the influence on the Philippines since then, like to the extent that most people actually don't speak Spanish down there, but they are fluently English speakers for the most part. And by the way, shout out to a friend of mine, Chris, who is German Filipino but born in the US. He would, at the time he was living there, have the most ambiguous identity crisis ever. But yeah, thanks to him, I've gotten a sudden interest in learning about the background story of the Philippines. So shout out to you, Chris.
They weren't expecting to get attacked. The majority of these soldiers, 12,000 of them, are non-combat related jobs or they're Filipino reservists. But that other 10,000 was the Philippine Scouts. And I cannot stress to you enough that these guys are absolute gangsters.
Jungle fighters.
They were founded in 1901 by the U.S. Army. It is essentially Filipino and Filipino-American soldiers being led by American officers.
By the way, the Philippines are the highest recipients of American aid in the southeastern region, right? So yeah, they also have solid, well, at least the US has solid military standing there. Because there was recently the whole, not that recent, but like tumult, dispute between the US and China regarding the Philippines.
And they are experts in guerrilla, anti-guerrilla, and jungle warfare. These are the guys that fought the Tan Sung rebels during the Moro Rebellion. They are literally the men that America's patron saint of hole punching, John Moses Browning, created the Colt 45
1911.
They are the direct predecessor of the Philippines' current special forces, the Scout Rangers, and
I did not know that.
Some of, if not the last people on the planet that you want to fight in the jungle. And one of the American officers leading these men is none other than Arthur Wermuth, son of a World War I veteran that grew up in Chicago. For high school, he would attend Northwestern Military Academy, and after graduating from there, he would be denied by West Point because the only thing he excelled at in life was football and winning fistfights. His football coach said that defensively he was a tough man to get through, and offensively many points were scored through holes that he opened. Despite being rejected by West Point, he still wanted to be a military officer, so he would go to college at Loyola University in Chicago, where he would join the ROTC program and get his bachelor's degree in bacteriology, which would later become known as microbiology. So after graduating from college and receiving his commission as a military officer, he would write the United States War Department requesting to get put on active duty. He would get accepted and sent over to the Philippines, where he would arrive in January of 1941 to train with the Philippine Scouts. Fast forward 11 months later, the Japanese show up and they attack. Filipino and American forces are not ready. They are outmanned, outgunned in every conceivable way. At this point, leadership decides their best bet is to pool all of their resources and have everybody move to the Bataan Peninsula. They are essentially going to back themselves into a corner, draw one line in the sand, and desperately try to hold that line long enough for American reinforcements to show up. It's not a great plan, but it's pretty much the only thing they can do. And if that wasn't bad enough, there's actually a problem with that. The Japanese are advancing so fast that they're going to be able to cut off the route to Bataan before everybody can actually make it there. So now, Arthur Wermuth and the rest of the 57th Infantry Regiment are going to have to go and fight the Japanese on the front line, desperately trying to hold them off long enough for all the other people to retreat. General Wainwright gives them the order to dig in and hold, and that's exactly what Arthur and his men do. At this point, Arthur is in command of Delta Company of the 57th Infantry Regiment, which is roughly 150 Philippine scouts, and for the next 2 weeks, they go toe-to-toe with the
worst
Japanese
Christmas
army,
ever.
desperately trying to hold them off long enough for everybody else to retreat. This was how Arthur and his men would spend Christmas of 1941, dealing heavy losses to the enemy. But by New Year's, they had faced the same thing and endured heavy losses themselves. By the first week of January 1942, Arthur's 150 men had dwindled down to just 37. At this point, it became clear that they were not going to be able to hold the front line, at which point they were ordered to retreat back to Bataan. But Arthur had a plan to slow down the Japanese even further. Arthur volunteers to sneak back into a city that recently fell to the Japanese by himself, because in that city there's a wooden bridge, and that wooden bridge is going to prove vital for the Japanese to quickly move troops further inland. And if Arthur can get rid of it, it is going to severely hamper their ability to do so.
It's weird. The thing about his unit there, him losing almost a third of them, like from 150 or so to 37 men, that is crazy to me, because growing up, I kind of had a sort of skewed and, should we say, not skewed, but rather naive, I was a kid, on the military. Because the closest relationship that I've ever had about this has been my aunt and uncle, who were respectively in the Air Force and the Marines. Now, it's, of course, from a different perspective there. This is some African corps, not the Africa Corps, but yeah, from Cameroon. But the rules are still the same. People are drafted, and my aunt, for an example, will have people working under her, and then she'll come back like 4 months later on a visit and talking about how she attended like 3 funerals. And that will be shocking, right? You're losing men just like that. But like, just to put that in perspective, this man just lost so many lives. And the reason as to why I say that my views of it was naive was that I didn't quite understand why it was affecting her so much, because it's a loss of human life. Like, it leaves you with PTSD too, not just the experiences that you have on a mission, but straight up what you see your man going through. And that's just 3 men. But then I realized again that, like, during World War II, people were dropping like flies. I remember making a calculation on this, that like 70 to 80 million people died in total during the war. That would be between the 1939 to 45, 365 days. We add it for hours. That puts us around 1,300 people. 1,300 people per hour dying. And it's like, of course, not all of them was through war or missions or firearms. We're of course talking about diseases, hunger, and all that stuff. But this is also affecting soldiers. So it was kind of the norm for people to witness stuff like this, and that is fucking scary. I don't know the emotional toll that it would have taken on people, but yeah, as an adult now, I understand it, and that's why I find it very baffling.
So Arthur is going to sneak into this city by himself with demo charges, his Thompson submachine gun, and 2 5-gallon jugs of gasoline. He is then going to make his way to Main Street under the cover of night, dump the gasoline all over the buildings, and light Main Street on fire. Once all the buildings in Main Street are engulfed in flames, that is a signal to the Philippine scouts miles away that they're going to start dropping artillery on that area, and Arthur is going to use that as a distraction to make his way over to this bridge, place some demo charges, and blow it up. And that's pretty much exactly what happens. Arthur sneaks into town, manages to light Main Street on fire, waits for the fire to grow a little bit, at which point Arthur knows the artillery fire is coming right on top of him any second, and he just has to make a run for this bridge. But this bridge is wide out in the open right next to Main Street, and he is about to run essentially down Main Street towards a bridge that's being guarded, and there is hundreds of Japanese soldiers everywhere.
All right, that seems easy enough.
Thankfully, most of them are distracted by the fact that most of Main Street is on fire, and not a lot of them take notice of the fact that there is now a 190-pound American sprinting down Main Street towards the bridge. But eventually, a couple of them would take notice and begin firing at Arthur, and he would be struck in the calf and fall to the ground. And right then is when the artillery rounds started dropping. And as soon as the artillery rounds started dropping, Arthur waited there for a second, and then when he thought they were all distracted again, he got up and continued to run towards the bridge.
I can't imagine the pain that you are already in. Like, you're solely driven by adrenaline at this point. Like, Jesus. Like, I've sprained my calf before, and I think that I've had a muscle tear once. I still have scars, but Jesus Christ, dude gets shot, keeps on running. Whew. Well, he had a duty to fulfill.
He then proceeded to place the demolition charges, blowing up the bridge before disappearing back into the jungle and making his way back to his men. So Arthur and his men make it to Bataan. At this point, you have to put yourself in Arthur's shoes. He is one of the highest ranking officers on the ground. He was just in charge of 150 men 2 weeks ago, and only 37 of them survived. That's not necessarily his fault. He was placed in a completely unwinnable situation, but ultimately, he's not going to feel great about himself losing that many of his men. He's been living in the Philippines for almost a year, training with the Philippine scouts. He's an expert in camouflage, an expert in jungle warfare, and an expert in guerrilla warfare tactics. And
so that's how his John Rambo arc is starting, huh? From sad to I'ma kill them all.
He decides that rather than lose any more of his men, he is going to go out past the front line into enemy territory by himself and terrorize the enemy. So that's what he does. He sleeps during the day, and every night he grabs his Thompson submachine gun, 2 Colt 45 1911s, and a bunch of grenades, and heads off into the jungle by himself to utilize hit-and-run tactics against the Japanese conducting guerrilla warfare. And on one of these missions, he's a couple miles into enemy territory from the front line when he hears a bunch of Japanese soldiers coming up on him. So he quickly hides in some bushes and camouflages himself, and 30 Japanese soldiers, an entire platoon, comes walking past. One of them almost steps on him, and he's just laying there dead quiet, trying not to breathe, and the troops are making their way towards the front line. And Arthur knows he has to do something because they're either going to launch an attack or they're getting reconnaissance to scout the front line. Either way, these guys gotta go. He knows that even if he pops up with the element of surprise from behind them with his Thompson submachine gun, he's still gonna lose that firefight. So he does the only thing he can think to do, and that is to get up and start walking in the column with these guys as if he was one of them. So he is literally following in this Japanese column, walking through the jungle towards the front line.
What in the One Piece is he doing? Okay, I know that some may not catch that reference, but yeah, there's like a scene in the anime One Piece where like the main character does some crazy stuff like that against the Marines. It's hilarious.
At which point he decides, hey, I gotta make sure these guys don't look back and actually try to get a look at me because I'm wearing a different uniform. They're gonna notice. So he decides that every time one of them steps on a twig or makes a noise, he's gonna shh, so they be more quiet, just reassuring that like, oh, That's obviously not an enemy behind me, it's somebody trying to get me to be quiet because they're on my side. Arthur Wermuth has just switched gears from John Rambo to Bugs Bunny fucking with Elmer Fudd. And he follows these guys through the jungle for miles, just shushing them the entire way. And then when they finally get up to the front line, Arthur knows that he has to do something. He has to alert his guys that they're about to attack. So he does the only thing he could think to do. He quietly pulls a pin from one of his grenades and then acts like he tripped on something, stumbling to the man in front of him, grabbing a hold of him for balance. And when he grabs a hold of him, he hands the grenade to him right in the guy's chest. That guy obviously grabs it, and Arthur runs off into the jungle.
Okay. I understand why they call him the ghost. Yo, I was be spooked the fuck out of my mind. Wait. Did that go... Okay, I was almost about to say... Well, there's a term, but that's more Chinese. They use the word guilo to like refer to foreigners. But did he just hand you a grenade? Yeah, he did. So, you're gonna throw it away or... Oh shit!
The Japanese soldier's like, wait, what? Oh god. Boom! He blows up. Then Arthur turns around with his Thompson and opens fire on the rest of them. This obviously alerts his men and they start opening fire too. They completely wipe out this Japanese platoon. After this and other events like it, the Japanese start to fear Arthur, referring to him as the Ghost of Bataan, while the American forces are referring to him as the one-man army. At this point, he gets his notoriety and other experienced Filipino scouts start volunteering to go out with him, but he doesn't want to lose any more men, so he keeps refusing, and he keeps refusing.
Oh.
And finally, there's one brave Filipino scout that he can't refuse because this guy will kick his ass. His name is Sergeant Crispin Jacob, aka Jock. He is described as being 6'4", 220 pounds, and Arthur Wermuth himself said that he is half Filipino, half Oriental giant. And he begins going out on these missions with Arthur, and time after time, Jock manages to save Captain Wermuth's life. At some point, it becomes apparent that the Japanese are intercepting frontline communications, but here's the thing, these communications aren't done over radio, they can't just be intercepted wirelessly. These are hardwired communications with a physical wire just strung out on the ground. This means that somewhere along that wire, the Japanese have tapped into it physically, and Arthur Wermuth and Jock are sent out at night to investigate. So they're tracing this wire down all night long, following this wire, and at some point in the darkness, they lose track of it. So they're trying to re-find where the wire went, they're looking. Arthur gets his legs tangled up in a vine and he falls down. No big deal, he pulls out his knife, goes to cut the vine. Oh shit, wait, hold on, this is the wire. At which point he looks over to yell at Jock like, hey, I found it, and he looks, and there is a ditch with a Japanese soldier and a bunch of equipment sitting in it, looking at him like he's dumbfounded. Arthur quickly draws his gun as the Japanese soldier draws his, and they have a good old-fashioned quick draw contest, which Arthur wins. Arthur, then quickly making it back to his feet, is then tackled by two Japanese soldiers into the ditch, one of them stabbing him with a bayonet through his arm, pinning him to the dirt wall inside of this trench, at which point he yells for Jock. Jock then runs up to the edge of the trench and sees Wermuth inside the trench fighting off two Japanese soldiers with his arm pinned to the wall. He takes aim with his rifle at the Japanese soldiers and then realizes that he doesn't want to accidentally hit Wermuth in the middle of the fight while it's still dark out. So he jumps in the trench and proceeds to beat the two Japanese soldiers to death with his rifle. He then destroys the radio equipment, helps Wermuth pull the bayonet out of his arm. He starts bleeding everywhere. He bandages that up and gets Wermuth back to the hospital, at which point the Ghost of Bataan is now bedridden and on doctor's orders is not allowed to leave.
Oh God. He's not just John Rambo, he's going through the whole Sylvester Stallone arc of surviving a beatdown like that. Oh, my arm.
While that's going on, word finally makes it back to America that there's some crazy 190-pound ex-football player running around in the jungles of the Philippines showing the Japanese what's up. And this is the one shining piece of good news that America clings on to in the days after Pearl Harbor. Arthur Wermuth unknowingly becomes an overnight celebrity in America. He is taking up all the headlines. They are making comic books about him and his partner Jock. He is inside of bubblegum packets telling
wow!
The story of them finding the tap in the communication line. Arthur Wermuth is now one of the first main characters in World War II fighting for America, and he is vital for overall American morale. And just like a main character, he decides that he's not going to stay bedridden. He violates doctor's orders, checks himself out of the hospital, and gets back in the fight. At this point, the Japanese have flooded the entire surrounding area with snipers that are picking off American and Filipino soldiers day and night, and Arthur Wermuth has to be the man that does something about it. But considering that there's so many of them and that Jock just saved his life, he comes to the conclusion that having some friends around isn't exactly a bad idea. So he starts taking volunteers to join his special anti-sniper unit, and 84 of the meanest, most experienced Philippine scouts volunteered. Not only were these guys counter-sniping the snipers, there was also a bunch of them out in the jungle, camouflaged and hidden, waiting for the sniper to fire so they knew where he was, and then they were going to come at him with machetes and Colt 45s. Throughout February and March of 1942, Arthur Wermuth, Jock, and their anti-sniper unit were credited with taking out 500 Japanese soldiers, and this is considered to be a very conservative estimate. Then in late March, Command would ask for volunteers to do a nearly impossible mission of recapturing the high point of Mount Phuket, at which point Arthur immediately volunteered and then asked his men who of them would also like to volunteer, and they all did. Arthur and his men then set off to try to complete this nearly impossible mission. It is a 36-hour hike through enemy territory just to get to the objective. Along that 36-hour hike, they are credited with taking out an additional 65 Japanese soldiers.
Jesus Christ. He's like Captain America and his Howling Commandos, except without the super soldier serum.
Then upon reaching Mount Phuket, they would launch an attack, and it would fail. Arthur would lose over half of his men. Having failed to take the high ground at Mount Phuket, Arthur and his surviving men would retreat back to Bataan. Along the way, they would get ambushed by a machine gun position, and Arthur would be struck in the chest with machine gun fire. Arthur would then wake up in a field hospital back at Bataan, where he was informed that the bullet went through his rib into his lung, and he was now battling an infection. I would assume they didn't have antibiotics to give him, because at this point, Bataan was in rough shape. They were down to half rations, and they were running out of every supply imaginable. Desperately trying to hold out long enough to get resupplied and reinforced. Arthur would remain in the hospital for 10 days, and every single day that passed, it became more and more apparent that they were losing and Japan was going to win. At this point, Arthur, against doctor's orders, with pus oozing from his chest, still battling an infection, would don his gear and go back out with his men one last time. Arthur and his anti-sniper unit desperately tried to hold the line against the Japanese, but due to sheer overwhelming numbers, they were beaten back over and over again, and during one of their retreats on April 9th, Arthur would slip down the side of a cliff, smacking his head on a rock, rendered unconscious. He would again wake up in the hospital, but this time when he awoke, he would come to find out that the Japanese had completely taken over Bataan, the Americans had been forced to surrender, and General MacArthur had fled to Australia.
I should have mentioned this, like I would have taken an extra jab at MacArthur from the previous video. That yeah, this was a period where he actually fled to Australia. But, oh my god, so now he's under Japanese captivity, and is most likely going to be part of a death march. Or what? Oh no. Struck in the shin, hole in the arm, pus oozing out of the chest, and with a concussion. Don't tell me that this man survived a death march. Do you know how far those things were? They had to force the POWs, regardless of who the fuck they were, to walk at least 100 kilometers. That's 60 miles? Yes, a mile is 60 miles. And if you were to trip or fall or lie on the ground, the Japanese soldiers would just shoot you. It is, and no, don't tell me that he partook in that. He just becomes a superhero at this point.
This is absolutely the worst possible outcome, because the Imperial Japanese believe that if you surrender in battle, you lose your honor, and if you lose your honor, you are no longer human. You are subhuman and no longer eligible for human rights, which gives them the justification to treat you however they want. Arthur Wermuth is bedridden, having been shot in the leg, stabbed in the arm with a bayonet, shot in the chest, concussed, and battling an infection, and he is probably one of the luckiest men there, because pretty much everybody else is forced to participate in the Bataan Death March, and I don't really want to get too far into what that is and what happened, but suffice it to say, over 30% of everybody else is going to die in captivity as a prisoner of war. And if Arthur Wermuth were also forced to go down the Bataan Death March, he would absolutely be a member of that 30% given his current condition.
Okay, he stayed bedridden. Thank God. Oh my God. I was like, dude, stay in bed.
Can't verify this for sure, but I think the reason that they let Arthur Wermuth have a chance at surviving is because technically he never surrendered. He was fatally wounded in battle, and when he woke up, he had already been captured. So I think that maybe the Japanese didn't look down on him as subhuman because he didn't forfeit his honor. He literally fought until he lost consciousness, and by sheer luck, he survived and woke up in captivity. After making his recovery, now Major Wermuth would find himself being the highest ranking military officer around, making him the leader of the few remaining Americans that were lucky enough to escape the Bataan Death March. And for the next year, they are used as forced labor to build Japanese airstrips. One of the Americans under the command of Arthur was a man by the name of Elliot Smesler, who later on in life would write a book of memoirs about his time as a prisoner of war under the Japanese. In that book, he wrote this, quote, "The first year of my captivity, I worked on building an airfield for the Japanese. Life wasn't bad because they were afraid of the major in charge. His name was Major Wermuth, and the Japanese called him Wermuth the Lion." Now, I think this is actually further evidence that the Japanese don't believe that he actually surrendered and didn't lose his honor in battle, because they are still scared of him despite the fact that he is their prisoner. And he definitely didn't surrender, because while Arthur and the men under his command did build the airstrip they were told to build, they sabotaged it so that the concrete would buckle underneath the weight of Japanese heavy bombers, not only damaging the airstrip, but the bombers as well. Yeah, despite being a POW for over a year, Arthur and the men under his command are still finding a way to slow down the Japanese military. Because of this, Arthur and the men under his command are sent to live on a hell ship known as the Oryoku Maru.
Okay, now, I understood the Jake McNasty, right? Because of his nastiness, despite the many things that he went through, experienced some stuff, but like mostly had a swell time. This man here had zero breaks. Like, listen, beside the fact that these things were basically like POW camps on water, people were stuck there. POWs and also soldiers stuck there as livestock, basically, were either dying of dysentery or because they were not registered as just cargo ships, because again, how are you going to verify that? They were mostly presumed to also be combatant ships, and for that reason, actual prisoners of war would be shot by their own allied forces. So, like, oh man, you are literally killing your own without knowing. It's messed up.
Which, if you don't know, a hell ship is essentially a POW camp on a boat, and they are infamous for their horrific living conditions. The only thing worse than being a starving POW is being a starving POW on a boat with no shade while you're seasick. Then on January 9th, 1945, the USS Hornet, an American aircraft carrier, would mistake the hell ship for a troop transport and bomb it. This bombing would kill over 250 Americans instantly, wounding and injuring almost every other American on board, including Arthur Wermuth. Despite having his wounds go untreated while starving to death, Arthur still somehow managed to survive, making it to Japan to be inside of a POW camp there, where he would later be freed after Japan surrendered. When Arthur Wermuth shipped off from America to the Philippines in 1941, he weighed 190 pounds. When he finally got to return home to America after World War II, he weighed only 105. He would then be awarded 4.
Oh. Scheiße. Yeah, when you need to borrow another language to just make an emphasis on just how bad it is.
4 Purple Hearts, the Silver Star, and the Distinguished Service Cross. He is credited with 116 kills and will go down in history as the one-man army of Bataan. Despite this, he credited his men, saying that 90% of what he was able to accomplish was due to the Philippine Scouts and that they were the best soldiers in the world. So in conclusion, the fall of Wake Island in the Philippines are considered to be some of the first losses dealt to America during World War II. But in many ways, they were also some of the first victories, as stories of heroes like that of Hank Elrod and the Marines of Wake Island, and Arthur Wermuth and his Philippine Scouts reached the rest of the world. It would become clear to America that this war was winnable, and it would become clear to Japan that they had a lot bigger fight on their hands than they ever anticipated. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go check out thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang, out.
Wow. I'm gonna be a little bit mean here, but it'll never get lost on me the sheer irony of like the strict shift of perception that we have of Japan today, at least for most people who are not interested in the story of the country, and especially not its undertaking up until World War II and how it treated the surrounding nation and islands around it. Just that how far war needed to go before they actually decided to surrender, which again in World War II they never did. Even during the Emperor's recorded speech, he never used the word surrender to actually give up. It's, oh man, it's insane. But yeah, nowadays we are only, for the most of us, are perceiving them as just the nation that has anime. But guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, please do go and subscribe to the Fat Electrician for more awesome story like this. Please check out all of his videos. They are super informative. That being said though, we should also have a wonderful day and see you guys in the next one. Bye.